Folks, how we living? Welcome to the Cripescast. I'm your host, Charlie Barons. We are brought to you by Jolly Good Soda, and this is today's episode. Hey, folks, how we doing? Welcome to another episode of the Cripescast. Today's Cripescast episode I'm super excited about because it's another in the series of Charlie is a hippie, and he loves our planet and wants to save it from its pending doom.
Nice.
Yeah, that was well titled. No, I am. I've always been an environmentalist. Those who listen to this podcast know that. You know, I'm a big fan of birds. I'm a big fan of just the natural world. And, that's obviously a theme here. I like talking to people about the environment and mostly about productive things that we can do. If you read the news, it's a lot of doom and gloom about the environment, but I kind of think that there's some hope there. And that if we all kind of do a little bit and, pressure our politicians more than the people bribing them, then maybe we can see some change, potentially. Today, we're talking to Tracy Hames, and he is the executive director of the Wisconsin Wetlands Association, and just a great dude, and we're talking about wetlands. Now, before you start snoozing, going to bed, because I know wetlands, when you say that to some people, they're like, boring. But wetlands are super important for just the way everything in our system works. Everything from water quality to, just to a healthy biodiversity. There's a lot of, species that depend on it that you wouldn't even think about. Like if you like deer hunting, bird hunting, fishing, whatever, water that is drinkable, there's something in here for everyone. So
yeah, I think when people drive by a wetland or they don't necessarily know what it is, they think like, they look at it and it's not necessarily, you brought this up in the episode, it's not necessarily the most like, it's a lake and like I get to look at this beautiful body of water, but it's just as important.
Yeah, it's a big old pile of mud and muck and whatnot. And, kind of some trees that may not look like they're doing so great, but they are. It's just kind of what they look like in the wetlands sometimes. And some are quite beautiful, and, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So, geez, Louise, Charlie, so good of you.
That's so sweet.
So anyways, we'll get to that in a moment. I love talking about this stuff, and, I hope I can interest some of you in it. So that'll be coming up in a moment. But before we get to that, I'm joined by Colleen Maraca, Coco Maraca, ladies and gentlemen.
What up?
As her friends call her. She is...
Not you.
She is the executive producer of the Cripescast. Wearing some interesting shoes today. I'm just gonna say that. Though, what are those?
They're called Ilsa Jacobsons.
Ilsa Jacobsons.
Sponsor me.
They got holes in them.
Yeah, they're nice for.
Those are nice for like pond socks. That's what I would call them.
Well, they're not cheap. They're very light. Do you want to hold it?
They look cheap.
Do they really?
Yeah. I mean, they look like
how light they are.
Very affordable. I don't know why I'm holding your shoe. Imagine where this has been. They are somewhat light, not as light as my Croc. My souped up Croc. Crocs sent over some shoes, and some of these new Crocs. Oh shoot! I just broke my mic. These new Crocs. It's gonna be interesting. I'm gonna fix.
That's the part where you have to tighten it there.
Tighten it where?
There.
I know. So what I'm doing.
The reason Charlie's wearing Crocs is because he cut himself, and so for the last week,
I'm sorry. Are you telling the audience my medical history? I feel like
that's a breach of HIPAA or something or other.
Well, you're not a doctor. I feel like it's a breach of employment. You know.
Yeah, my NDA doesn't allow me to disclose it.
That'd be hilarious. Maybe I should do an NDA. I feel like at some...
We're past that point.
Oh, we are?
Everything that needs to be known about you is...
It's in the vault.
Yeah. It's in my tell-all.
NDAs can't be... I don't know.
Retroactive?
I don't know how they work. Anyways, my doctor just texted me back.
What did he say?
I said, I can't feel my toe. Is that normal? He said, yeah, the nerve is healing. You got the plantar digital nerve going right by your wound. You still can move your big toe.
Can you feel that?
Okay. Oh, yeah, I can. Oh, yeah, I can move her okay. I can move her real good.
I still can't feel, I got my ACL.
Yeah.
Right here, I can't feel that.
Oh, really?
Still.
Yeah, I was talking to my dad. I called my dad today. So to bring the audience up to date, yes, I did cut my foot. And I got these Crocs here. Okay,
Yeah.
I got these Crocs. I'm wearing these suckers because they're very wide. And my foot is a little bit swollen, folks. I got a boo-boo. A big boo-boo, we'll call it. I cut the ball of my foot. But if you have to cut one of your balls...
Don't try like your stand-up stuff here. like literally.
I wanted to see if I could get any laugh out of you with it. You know what?
You
It
already
worked
told
on
me
stage.
You already told me it, and I
stage.
laughed when you said it initially. The thing about me is I'm going to be honest about it.
Well, so yeah, I know. That's why I tried it in front of you, and now my audience sees the internal process of my stand-up, and they're unimpressed.
No, these are like super industrial cloud shoes.
Yeah, they're bizarre.
I could see a hipster wearing these and calling it like fast fashion.
I wore them to the family reunion, and everybody made fun of me. Everybody.
Understandably so.
Yep. But I like them, honestly. I like them. And I don't think they're fast fashion. I'll tell you this about Crocs. I got one of the first pairs of Crocs in Wisconsin. I did. Because I was working as a bike mechanic over at the bike shop when Crocs first came out. Don't look so unimpressed at me. This is a fascinating thing. And Crocs first came out.
I have resting indifference face. Keep going.
And
Crocs first came out.
Crocs first came out, and yeah, I got a pair.
How old were you at the time?
I was 16.
Yeah, I remember getting my first pair of Crocs when I was 6, so probably at the same time.
God, I really need another co-host for this thing. So,
Did you ever have gibbets?
I mean, no. I've never been a gibbet guy.
That's
Never.
okay.
Yeah. I'm not saying I would never be. I just, need to.
They were the perfect shoes for lifeguarding. I had Crocs I had my lifeguarding Crocs.
Yeah.
Because then if you see something happen, you just kick them off and run.
Yeah, and they're floaters, so you don't even have to kick them off. They're like big bobbers too.
Well, like if I have to run somewhere fast, it'll probably slow me down if I try to, I don't have adventure mode on.
Uh-huh.
Yep,
you can just kick them off if you don't have adventure, if you're not four-wheel driving them. So anyways, I cut the ball of my foot. I was playing mermaids with my buddies. That's the long and short of it. If you want to know the rest, you can see me live on the road, ladies and gentlemen. I am coming to your town.
Yeah, how was your shows this weekend?
Did a couple shows in New Richmond. The new tour is feeling good. The new materials feeling right.
Good. How's the ball joke going?
Ball joke's going very good. It's getting a lot of laughs.
When I come and see it in person, if I ever come to this next leg of the tour,
could you laugh?
I will laugh so hard you'll hear me guffaw.
Okay, well, don't throw me off my game by your fake laughter. Now everybody who I told this to will fake laugh on it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
But no, you're feeling good about it?
I'm already over it. Yeah, I'm feeling good about the tour. Nice. Feeling good about my foot. Feeling good about everything. A lot of new tour dates up. You can check them out on Cripescast.com.
Mantalkminute.com.
Let's give them one website. Is it all on Cripescast?
Yeah, everything's on Cripescast.
Cripescast.com. You can go check out the tour dates. And then, folks, we also got a bunch of merch up there if you check on the merch section. So there's the plugs. We got the plugs going. Yep. All right, folks, that is it. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Tracy Hames. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, Charlie. And thanks for sending the donations our way from the Steve Stricker American Family Fund. So
yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
Last year we got the donation and we didn't know where it came from. We just got a check in the mail. And this year they actually sent us an email and kind of explained how it was set up. So
that's funny. You thought you just got a donation from AmFam?
Yeah, we had no idea where it came from. It just literally was a check in the mail. So
got it. So, that sounds about right. Yeah, how it doesn't matter if you knew it. Just good that you got that money, But I've been a big fan of kind of what you guys have been doing for a while, and just to give people a backstory, I was doing an event with Steve Stricker for the American Family Insurance tour or whatever, and it was a golf outing. And part of the deal is that you can pick an organization that you like and that you want to donate to. So yeah, I saw what you guys were doing, and I really appreciated it. So how I kind of want to give people just a general, invite as many people as possible into this conversation to start with. So I kind of want to start very basic, and and honestly, I want to make sure I know all the facts too, and I'm telling the clearest story because I look into this stuff out of my own interest, but who knows what I miss or what information I've, thought was accurate and isn't. Why don't we start very basically? What is a wetland?
Good idea. Yeah, we'll start very basic, and you're not alone. So let's start by telling me a little bit from in your brain before you did your research. What did wetland mean to you, or do you have a story? What's your perception at the beginning?
Well, okay. So here's kind of where I'm coming from on this. I know from my time in school or whatever that wetlands are important because they act as a carbon sink, one. Two, if you have a house or a property, wetlands are important because that will help prevent them from flooding. And because that water's got to go somewhere. If we concrete over everything, well, you have a lot of floods. Actually, my one of the houses I grew up in flooded because they made the river concrete, essentially, and then they did it because that was the look or something in the 60s or whenever they did it. And since that flood, they ripped it up and now made it a wetland, and they had the river, instead of going in a straight line, winding. So, and a lot of when it comes to wetlands, I feel like people who want to do right by the environment are going to want to protect the wetlands anyway. But I try to focus my thoughts and in this conversation in a lot of ways on those that care about the economics of it. Because we live in a country that, for whatever reason, is driven by what the stock market's going to do tomorrow, not even a year from now. And that's screwed us in so many ways. But I think if we make it even very clear of how this affects your bottom line, that would bring people kind of on board. And also, beyond that, just to answer your question directly, what's a story I have of the wetlands? I love hunting and duck hunting and all of that sort of stuff, and that takes place in the wetlands. And I'm also a big bird watcher. The ones I don't shoot, I like to look at, and also wetlands are very important for those. So that's kind of a very roundabout way of answering your question.
Well, that's pretty typical for us folks in Wisconsin, where they were introduced to wetlands oftentimes was either in hunting or bird watching or things like that. So great. We'll tell the story today about why people should care about wetlands and the economics and all that stuff as well. So hopefully it'll be something that's interesting to folks and it'll make a lot of sense. So if you want, we'll start right in as what is a wetland, right? A lot of people don't understand what wetlands are. They just see these things as they're driving down the road or they interact with them, out in the field or here or there. A lot of people's perception of what a wetland is in their mind's eye, and you're a little more beyond that, which was nice to hear, but people think about an open water area with a bunch of cattails around the edge of it and a bunch of ducks or herons or things out in the water. And that's a type of wetland, but it's not every type of wetland we have in Wisconsin. And when you ask a wetland scientist, first thing they'll do is go into this long, convoluted definition of what a wetland is, talking about the soils, talking about the water, talking about the vegetation, and all this stuff all interacts, and et cetera, et cetera. For the purposes of this conversation, it's important just to remember that wetlands are those areas in between the places that are always dry and the places that are always wet. Okay, so it's the in-between zone. And because of that, you have a great diversity of wetland types, depending on how close they are to the always dry side or the always wet side, right? Some wetlands are pretty much always wet. Other ones are just wet very certain times of the year. And it's the water and those types of conditions that really help create the characteristics and the benefits that a wetland expresses. So we always say it's all about the water. Understanding what's going on with the water is the most important thing about a wetland. So if it's always wet, it's a lake, right? Or a river.
Yep.
If it's always dry, it's an upland field or an upland forest or something like that. So in Wisconsin, we have an incredible diversity of landforms throughout the state. As you know, you get around the state a lot. Every part of Wisconsin is different than the next part. That's one of the great things about where we live. Door County is different than the Northern Lakes area, different than the Driftless, different than the Central Sands, et cetera. And the wetlands are expressed that way. They're different in all different places. And they're connected to our other waters. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the way they're formed is all about what's happening with the foundational geology, what's going on with the soils, all the things that's creating literally the movement of water through our landscape. And so always be thinking about water, what's going on with the water when you're thinking about wetlands.
And, what has been, well, I think here's the thing with wetlands that I think has kind of allowed them to be sort of, we've lost so many of them. I think because they're not always the prettiest part of the deal,
I disagree.
Well, no,
I know.
To your average guy or gal or whatever, just driving through, they see some wetlands and they're like, what can I do? And maybe that's it. It's not just the aesthetic. I personally like them too, but some folks see it as like, marshy land or a bunch of trees that look like they're half dead, even though they're not. They see kind of rough landscape, and there's not much you can do there to a degree. You could possibly kayak some or this, that, and the other thing, but you're not getting out there on your boat. It's a tough area to fish, if that's even possible, through a stream or something. And, you can see where the temptation comes in to say, well, let's just, what if we fill this in and put up a subdivision here? Who's going to care? Who's going to fight about that? Probably not a lot of people, because it's not intuitive, like if you have this beautiful lake or this majestic river or something like that.
Right. So that's the perception, the historical perception, right, with wetlands, not just recently, but going back hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. Wetlands are the places where there's mosquitoes, there's malaria, there's, deep muck, there's all these things. And it's really hard to occupy those areas. So human use is difficult. And I will say wetlands are much more than just producing mosquitoes. They also produce deer flies and ticks. So if people are wondering about that. But
yeah, you're really doing a great job on the PR side of that right there.
Well, we'll get to why they're important in a minute here. So let's talk first about the different types of wetlands in Wisconsin, right? So
sure. You
got the marsh that, we talked about with the cattails and things like that. You also have, historically, we had lots of sedge meadows in Wisconsin. And those are the places that look like almost like grass fields, but they can be really wet, and they have, tussock type vegetation, and incredibly important and diverse for wildlife, even fish species. We also have swamps. And I want to say a lot of people, when they think of wetlands, they just use the term swamp, right? Oh, there's a swamp over there. Swamps are actually wetlands that have woody growth in them, trees or woody shrubs or things like that. So a true swamp actually has to have wood in it. So we have ash swamps here that are actually being threatened by the emerald ash borer beetle and things like that. But and we also have bogs. We know about bogs, and they have the sphagnum moss, they have the pitcher plants and things like that. And we have other very rare wetlands that used to be more common called fens, and those are wetlands that are produced by spring water coming up out of the ground, and on and on and on. There's many, many different wetland types. So I always encourage people to get out, get in the mud, and you'll start to see these things from a different view than just driving down at 60 miles an hour, looking at the wetlands. And they are boring sometimes, to the non-informed person. You go up into lake country, for instance, right? And as you're driving down the road, and we all do this, we're looking at the lakes. Oh, there's a nice lake out there. Maybe I want to go fishing in that place. And you're driving by wetlands and it's just kind of passed through. When I give talks up in lake country, I'll ask them, what's your perception, of wetlands in this county? I'll say, we've got 10,000 acres of wetlands in such and such county. How many acres of lakes? How many acres of wetlands do you think we have? 10% of that, 20% of that? And most people think, yeah, probably something like that. In those areas in the northern part of the state where we have healthy lakes, we have 4 to 5 times the acreage of wetlands versus the acreage of lakes. And the reason one of the important reasons that those lakes are clean and healthy is because those wetlands are there doing their job, cleaning up the water, et cetera, et cetera. So,
actually, real quick, I just want to, we haven't mentioned that aspect of this, but the wetlands, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they essentially act as a filter for all the lakes. Is that correct?
Right. We're going to talk about all the good things that wetlands do here in a minute, right?
Got it. Sorry to cut you off. I'll let you keep rocking and rolling.
On that, but you're right. Perception can be bad, but the more people interact, that's the message we always give. Get out there and explore these places that maybe you've ignored in the past, and you'll be really surprised at the diversity and the beauty and what's out there. But you also need to wear boots and get out in the mud. We always say get out and get your feet wet, and that's the best way to explore these places. But be careful where you go sometimes, right? Sometimes it can get a little deep, and I've been in situations in the past where I wasn't sure I was getting out of the mud that I got myself into.
Yeah,
in my previous position,
both boots intact.
Yeah, I worked for a couple of decades out west on a reservation, and there was a place where I was working, and one of the tribal elders told me, "Be careful out in that area. I lost a horse one time to quicksand." And okay. So I was out hunting up in that area, and this was before cell phones and everything was in the 90s. And I parked about a mile away. I was walking through this area, and I was crossing this slough, and I had chest waders on. I got into a situation where it was so deep, I was almost over my waders.
Oh, wow.
And never hit bottom, right? And you're in a situation like that, and how do you get out? So I was kind of grasping at some of the bulrushes and things, trying to figure out how to give myself leverage. It took me about a half hour to get out of there. It's the only time I ever really worried about it. But of course, I was hunting at the time. And when you're in those situations, any good duck hunter knows that your head will go under, you'll be dead before your gun gets wet. So I did get out of there without getting my gun wet. And so it's important.
Just sitting there like this. Yeah.
And it wasn't really quicksand. It's not true quicksand. And, we don't have that in Wisconsin either. And we always say the word, or people use the term quicksand, but they just mean deep muck. And, where do we know everything we know about quicksand? Where did we learn it? 2 sources, Gilligan's Island and old Tarzan movies, right?
Yeah.
And, anyways, but we can have very, very deep muck soils here. And when we talk about climate change and carbon sequestration, we'll talk more about the muck soils.
Okay.
But anyways, get out there, get in the mud, but also be aware of where you're going and be careful. But you'll be amazed at the beauty and the diversity you see.
So let's kind of transition into what like the nuts and bolts of why wetlands are important. And then from there, I think it'd be good to talk about the economic implications if we, continue on a path of eliminating wetlands. So
wetlands are the great managers of our water. And what I mean by that is when you think about how our landscape handles precipitation, snow melt, groundwater movement, etc., wetlands are the features on our landscape that really kind of dictate how water is moved and what happens across the land. And so let's look at it this way. Think about what we call a watershed. And that's a big term sometimes that a lot of people that aren't in the resource business use very often. But a watershed is an area where every drop of rain or all the snow that lands in the watershed drains to a common either lake or river or something like that. So think of a basin and all the water goes to the same location, right? And you'll have watersheds next to each other and et cetera. What's happened in the past is we've removed a lot of the wetlands, especially in the tops of our watersheds. And the wetlands in the tops of our watersheds, the high portions where the rain and the snowmelt falls originally, historically we had basins all through there. And a lot of times they were very small, but they would fill up with rain in the spring. They would certainly fill up with snowmelt, and they'd hold on to that water and do a couple things, either soak it into the ground slowly or slowly release it out into the creeks and into the rivers and into the waterways downstream. And that slow release is really important, mainly because think of a bucket of water. If you took a bucket of water and you slowly trickled out the water, it just goes really softly. If you pour it all out at once, you spend all your water in a few seconds. Watersheds are the same way. When we remove our wetlands in the top portions of our watershed, that rain, instead of being held up there, goes whooshing downstream, creating erosion, creating gullies, and grabbing all that dirt and carbon and everything else down into our lakes or into our waterways. By capturing that water, holding on to it, it cleans the water, allows the sediment to drop out, and it allows what we call the erosive energy, the ability of that water to pick up dirt and cause erosion. It reduces that very much. So having those waters holding that on is critically important. The other thing that's really important is when it soaks into the ground, especially snowmelt. A lot of our trout waters in Wisconsin are very dependent upon wetlands on the landscape as well. And people don't think about that oftentimes. And it's for that same reason. When we capture that snowmelt, that cold water, and allow it to soak into the ground above our trout stream, that water then is slowly working towards downstream through the soil towards our trout stream. And trout need cold water, as we all know, right? In Wisconsin, you don't have trout unless you have significant groundwater resources feeding those trout streams. Because honestly, we have 70-degree dew points in Wisconsin. That's tropical in the summer. Wisconsin's a tropical area with a very good disguise 9 months of the year, but trout can't live in that hot weather if they don't have cold water feeding out of the ground. Well, wetlands grab that water, cold water, and the ground acts like a refrigerator. It keeps it cold, and that water that was soaked in by the wetland actually is getting to the trout stream by July and August right now and providing that cool water for the trout. So all these different things in terms of water management is really important. Wetlands also are really good at processing nutrients and helping reduce not only the flush of water coming down our waterways, but the flush of nutrients as well. So if we've got weeds in our lake, if we've got algae or things like that growing, oftentimes we're looking at the lake, we're looking at that place and say we need to fix that. Well, let's look upstream and see what's happened upstream. Has there been wetland loss or things that are contributing to the conditions that create those nuisance problems? So those are really important parts of it in terms of water management. So reducing flood peaks, capturing water, getting water back into our soil, and providing, of course, the fish wildlife benefits that we all know. Northerns have to spawn in wetlands, right? They come up out of Green Bay classically. Even walleyes, there are some areas where walleyes spawn in wetlands in the Fox River Basin. So incredibly important. The diversity, 75% of our wildlife, use wetlands and things like that. So when you're thinking about the needs you have in your region or in your area, what we like to present then is how wetlands can be important to the issues, especially the water issues you're dealing with wherever you are in the state or in the region here. So So we'll talk about that in a second, but those are some of the big benefits of wetlands and really present a high quality of life here. We didn't even talk about carbon storage. We can talk about that now if you want, or we can move on.
Well, I think, the impacts of climate change are, we are currently in the hottest summer we've ever had. We've had the hottest day on Earth ever not too long ago. I think the reality of climate change is starting to hit a lot of people now, even if they were hesitant to believe climate change was real beforehand. I think there's really no question of that now. I think some people are now saying, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so why don't we just keep business as usual?
Right.
So with that said, what benefit do wetlands provide from a carbon sequestration standpoint?
So in Wisconsin, we're situated really well. One of the best states in the nation in terms of certain types of wetlands that are really good at what they call sequestering carbon. In other words, pulling carbon out of the air and putting into the soils. And these are what we call the histosols. It's a technical name for a soil type. It also means the wetland muck, that big, deep stuff that I got stuck up to my chest in. Those are big, deep, boot-sucking muck. And those are the soils that are really good at pulling carbon out of the air. And the way it works is that, of course, they grow up. All the vegetation that grows in the wetlands is very robust, and it's pulling carbon. Obviously, the plants are pulling carbon out of the air and building their structure. And at the end of the season, they die off and they'll fall down. And because they're in a wetland, the wetland conditions that are wet, because there's a lot of water in there, the plants don't decay like they would in an upland situation. There's no oxygen. So you get this buildup of dead organic matter, and that's what peat is, right? When you think about what peat is, that's a type of soil that is almost all carbon-based materials built up over hundreds and thousands of years. So here you have this mechanism where the carbon in the plants fall down, they don't decay, they get saved in the wetland, no oxygen. The next year goes again. So you're pulling carbon in over and over and over. We've lost a lot of our muck soil wetlands in Wisconsin, especially in the southern half of the state. Way back in the day, we really liked those areas because they were very conducive, especially for vegetable farming. And so we drained a lot of these areas. They call them muck farms even to this day. And they go out and farm the muck soils. And when you do that and build the drainage infrastructure to be able to farm a big, deep, wet, mucky wetland, it takes a lot of drainage to do that. And when those soils are exposed to the air, right, we removed the oxygen. So now we have normal soil decay processes going on. That starts the process of all those hundreds or thousands of years of organic material in those soils to start being released because they're exposed to oxygen. So there are muck farms now where a lot of them are going back into wetland, but you'll go out with the farmers out there and they'll tell you, when we started farming this thing back in the 1940s, our soil, our crop field has subsided, has dropped 6 feet in elevation over the decades. And that's because there was that loss of the organic component of those soils being lost because of air. So not only are we not pulling carbon back in from the air, we're sending it the other direction. Thousands of years of carbon storage then when we drain these wetlands goes back up into the air, contributing to more of this kind of stuff. The other aspect of wetlands and climate change, and we don't even really have to use the term climate change very often. Like you say, some people, that's a sensitive word. The way it's being expressed in Wisconsin right now, one of the ways that we're seeing big changes happening just in the last, 10, 15 years is through the development of really large localized storm events, especially in the summer. And what happens is you'll get a storm moving in about 8 o'clock at night, and it'll park in one location. and it can drop, a foot of rain overnight onto one location, into one watershed. And with the wetland loss we've had, with all the changes we've had on our landscape, we're blowing out roads, we're blowing out culverts, like you say, we're flooding houses, we're doing all these things that water's going in places where we don't necessarily want it. And the energy of that water is causing a lot of problems. Up in the Ashland area in 2016, they had one of those events, and it was literally $35 million in damage to public infrastructure just in one overnight rain event. Oh my goodness. And they said, oh, that'll never happen again. 3 years later, it happened again, same spot. And we're getting these rain events all around Wisconsin. You never know, almost like a tornado. Where's it going to hit this year? And no part of the state has been spared these crazy, big, localized storm events. So it's getting the attention of a lot of people. And wetlands are a big part of the solution to dealing with those impacts brought on by those storms. And it goes back to wetlands managing the water. We talked about the upper watershed wetlands, right? Capturing that rain as it comes down. But we also need to bring the wetlands back that are along our waterways, our creeks and our rivers. These are what we call floodplains, right? Mm-hmm. Normally in a natural situation, you'll have a creek, and like you were talking about earlier, it's real windy. And when the spring comes and the waters come, the water spreads out of the channel and goes out across the land in what we call a floodplain. And there's vegetation and wetlands all through the floodplain. And the vegetation kind of really acts like friction. It captures that water, blows it down, reduces the energy, allows the sediment to drop out, etc. We've lost so much of our upper watershed wetlands due to development because of the easy ones to drain, right? Because they're up on the closer to the dry side. But we've also lost a huge amount of our floodplains. And what happened, way back when during development years, we'd go into our creek area and it was messy and it was windy and there was a lot of land that we couldn't really use productively, at the time. So what did we do? We straightened the creek out, move it over to the side of the valley, and then move in and either, crop it or develop it for one reason or another. And that's the floodplain. So we're turning an area that used to spread water out very slowly and capture it and allow it to soak into the ground and reduce the energy, reduce the erosive force, moving it over to the side into a straight line ditch that pretty much acts just like a fire hose. So when we get water, we lose our wetlands up above, all that water comes down the hill, gets into those ditches, it's off for the races. And if there's culverts, if there's roads, if there's infrastructure that we want to protect, that's right in the firing line. And so that's why we're having so much damage right now. Then you put climate-induced storms on top of it all. Oh my goodness, right? $35 million in damage from an overnight rain. So a big part of the work we're doing right now is helping people understand that story and understand that we've got to start putting wetlands back in the right locations to address these very real issues that our communities are experiencing right now.
Hey, folks, how we doing? If you're a long-time listener, you know there's no other soda that I pair with my brandy old fashions other than the Jolly Good Sour Power. Now, that's somewhat of a lie. I've done other sodas from time to time if the Jolly Good's not there, but oh my gosh, let me tell you this. It's a heck of a lot better when it's there. So if you are a first-time listener, let me tell you how to make your old fashions Wisconsin style. Get that Jolly Good Sour Power if you're going sour. Oh my gosh, so good. JollyGoodSoda.com for all your flavor needs. Check them out. And folks, let me tell you, are you getting ready to start a summer DIY project? Fleet Farm's your one-stop shop for everything you need, whether you're a rookie handyman or a seasoned veteran. They've got something for every job that every DIYer can use. Shop their selection of top brands like Milwaukee and DeWalt for all your power tools, outdoor power equipment, and more. Plus, you'll look the part too after shopping their selection of workwear from trusted brands like Carhartt and Dickies. Check them out. Fleet Farm, we love it. And folks, the best way to support the podcast, head on over to Cripescast.com, click on that merch section. We've got Team Soda versus Team Pop shirts. We got the book bundle going on where you can get my book, Midwest Survival Guide, plus a Tell Your Folks I Says Hi Koozie, plus a bottle opener for just $31. It's a steal. Jeez Louise. And finally, International Beer Day is this Friday, August 4th. Go to cripescast.com and click on the merch section. You can get discounts on our Roll Out the Barrel t-shirt and our Keep Her Moving pint glasses in honor of beer. God bless, folks. Keep her moving. We'll talk to you soon. And what would you say is standing in the way from, restoring the wetlands and preventing current wetlands from being developed? What industries, what folks have the most interest in seeing the wetlands go away?
Yeah, I'm actually really optimistic right now. Some really good stuff is happening in Wisconsin. So we'll talk about that. And the perspective is, historically, we had 10 million acres of wetlands in Wisconsin, right? That's a wet foot every 3 or 4 steps. That's a lot of wetlands. We were a soaking wet state. We've lost half of the wetlands than what we had historically. And most of that loss is probably from Highway 10 south, certainly Highway 29 south. We're in decent shape in most areas in the lake country in the northern part of the state. That's why we have such high quality lakes, rivers, and fishing. So you can't remove that amount of wetlands without serious implications. So our message to people is, how can wetlands be a solution to the issues that you're facing in your community? And that means locally. What are the problems you're running into right now? And so our program's approach, our organization's approach is not to get people to like ducks and frogs and pretty flowers if they don't already like those things. Our approach is to get them to understand why wetlands are important to the things they already care about, right? So if you're the town of Ashland, 75% of your yearly budget for the whole town goes to road repair on a normal year. You put out culvert loss and some of these things from these rain events, and that's a big, big issue. So we work with the town of Ashland and say, how can wetlands be a solution to your budget woes, right? And that means putting wetlands back in a cost-effective way so you're not paying to fix your roads as much as you used to. And it's really taking off when you take that perspective, because then people aren't, just thinking about wetlands as these wasted spaces that we see as we're driving down the road, but they can put it together and understand why they're important to what they're doing right now. So whether you're a farmer, whether you're a developer, whether you're working to expand industry in an area, you don't want problems with runoff and rain events.
Right.
I live in Middleton. A few years ago, we had one of those big rain events in Middleton, right?
Yeah.
And the industrial park in Middleton had 1.5 feet of water in it. The Costco was flooded 1.5 feet.
Not and the Costco.
Believe it or not. Yes, I know.
Wow.
It. So, but anyways, the point is, when you look at where the water was on that big rain event, and then you look at the map of where the wetland soils are, because wetland soils, after a wetland's been drained, the soils still have the characteristics where you can see that used to be a wetland for decades and decades afterwards. So we know, that's why we know where wetlands used to be, right? And that area that got flooded lined up perfectly with where the wetlands used to be in that area. And no surprise, right? And so we had all kinds of damage and economic problems. We blew out the railroad, a bunch of things because of this big overnight rain event. So how then can we think about wetlands on the landscape and be strategic about how we can not only protect what we've got left, the half that we have left, but how can we think about putting the right amounts of the right wetlands in the right locations to solve the problems we're having? And that takes planning, that takes an understanding of the problems that we have. And every community, every watershed, is dealing with different issues. And wetlands can be a part of those solutions. But we can't be random about it, right? And in the past, a lot of the wetland programs that we have not just in Wisconsin, but throughout the nation, were kind of random. Hey, we've got money to fix wetlands. Who wants to sign up? And somebody that wants duck hunting or this or that would sign up. And it didn't necessarily put the right amounts of the wetlands where they're most effective. So we're working now, developing, and you talk about the barriers to get this stuff done. There's about 20 things that have to get done to get this work happening across the landscape right now. And we're testing it out in different communities right now in really exciting ways. Some of them are literally just knowledge, how can we gain the knowledge we need to do this type of work and identify the places where wetlands can be best solutions. How do we get the word out to get people to understand the importance of wetlands, right? The education and engagement component. How then do we build the statewide programs and funding sources to get this stuff going at the scale we need to? And we don't need hundreds or thousands of wetlands put back on the landscape. We need hundreds of thousands back on the landscape to solve the water issues that we're having right now. Our impaired waterways are increasing in the state. And once again, if you take a map of the impaired waterways in Wisconsin, put it over where the wetland loss was, guess what? They also line up perfectly. So wetlands aren't the only thing we need to do, but we can't fix these things without serious amounts of wetlands. And the last thing is, how do you permit all this stuff, right? The red tape can be sometimes overwhelming. In our means to protect wetlands, we have a whole level of bureaucracy to make it hard to deal with wetlands. That also sometimes impedes the ability for us to bring wetlands back. So we're working on all these different levels to get things together to allow this type of work for us to be strategic and start putting wetlands back on the landscape. And it'll never happen until the communities want it to happen, right? If people are fighting it or don't understand it, all the money and all the programs are worthless. So outreach, education, policy work, all these levels is what needs to be addressed when you're doing this type of work. And it's really exciting stuff because people of all persuasions, all political persuasions, et cetera, are getting it when you present wetlands in that way. And so that's why I'm so excited, because good things are happening right now in terms of people finally getting to look at wetlands a little differently than they had in the past. Mm-hmm. So,
well, that's great. So, yeah, I mean, really, you might think of it being a left thing to protect the wetlands, kind of like an environmental hippie type thing. That would be like the perception, historically speaking, perhaps. But truly, if you break that out, especially in Wisconsin, you've got hunters who are both sides of the aisle. You've got farmers who absolutely need wetlands to prevent their own erosion and to make their crops strong and consistent and have that water and also that filtration, it is a benefit to everybody. What would you say is maybe the biggest hurdle standing in the way, aside for is it like the you kind of mentioned a few things there, but would it be like the political side of it? Is it tough to get politicians to care about it, or are they kind of on board, or is it tough to get people to care about it? You kind of mentioned the biggest thing is getting people to care, because people that will then push the politicians. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and I've found that some politicians are people also. It's crazy, but yeah.
So, no, come on, that's not true. Do not label them like that. That puts a human note on them. No, I know they are people, but you know what I mean. Like the constituents push them, and
so a couple of things. When you go out into our agricultural communities, in our rural areas, and get out there with farmers and cattle people, and I've worked with those people my whole career. A lot of these folks on farms are multi-generational families working the same land, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, they care about the land. They care about the water. They care about it deeply, and they know about what's going on in this situation so well. So work upon that, right? And so as they're looking not only to make money, they're not these evil people out there saying, how can I exploit the landscape to my advantage in every way I can? They're good family people trying to work this stuff out.
Yeah.
And so when you can present wetlands to them and say, okay, how can we think about wetlands in terms of water management on your land? Then they're very perceptive of that, especially if it's cost effective. Friday, I was out visiting some farms up in Marathon County, and very exciting, and they looked at wetlands in a different way than they had before, because in the past, wetlands were only presented to them as, hey, this is a good thing for duck habitat. And so let's dig a little scrape in the ground and try and get some ducks in there. When they can see, when you go out with these farmers and walk their land with them, and they can tell you about what's going on their property, and then the issues they're having in terms of runoff or this or that, whatever the issues is, and then to help them understand a little more where wetlands may be a piece of their operation, then they're like, that's great. I can do that. That's not so scary. In fact, that's to my advantage. Now translate that to the Capitol, and our office is 2 blocks off of the square, right? So we're up there all the time. And same thing, when you're dealing with those folks, we're talking about wetlands as solutions. We're talking about how can we get wetlands back in a manner that not only don't hurt the other things we're using, land for in the state, but can be a benefit to those things. And of course, the big storms are on everybody's mind, and they're looking for solutions for that. And so we've been working, up there last several years and moving some bills through, covering some very important things with total bipartisan support right now.
That's great.
And some of the great wetland supporters right now are literally on both sides of the aisle.
Sure.
And that's what we need, because if wetlands get political, you can't run long-term wetland policy on a pendulum, right? And the way that works is, these folks get in charge and they move things over here. Then the other folks get in charge, they undo it, and it goes over here. Back and forth, doesn't work. So we've got to get everybody together saying, okay, how can we then do this and get wetlands back on the landscape? We've got a bill right now that same thing, AB and SB 222. It sailed through the Senate. It got into the governor's budget and was signed, and now it's through committee in the Assembly, and it's up for vote next time they meet. And we expect it to pass on through. And what that's going to do is create a new program through the Wisconsin Emergency Management Department, which will provide funding for communities to do the types of things that we're talking about. Look in their areas, identify what their problems are, and gather the information they need to understand where the work needs to be done and in what quantities to address the specific issues that they're facing. And so it's really exciting stuff, because people are taking a different view of it now. And when you've been out in wetlands and working the landscape, like we have, all these years, you really understand the power of a floodplain wetland or an upper watershed wetland to provide these services, to act as solutions to the water and the issues that we're having around our state. So I'm really optimistic right now. And it also means getting those folks up in the Capitol, out of their office, up in their district, getting them out in the mud, talking to them about what's going on, understanding what their concerns are, what their priorities are up in their districts, and then how wetlands can be a part of the solutions to their priorities.
So would this kind of be an example of how it works? Like, let's say my community, I live in Milwaukee, and maybe Milwaukee being such a metropolitan area isn't the best example, but let's say that there is a significant amount of flooding going on during certain parts of the year, and that there's this piece of land over here that may have been a wetland before, but it's currently just kind of meh. There's maybe a building on it that's in disrepair, and there's a thing over here, and it's sort of like the low-hanging fruit. and it was wetland and it could be wetland again, would the money then go to sort of restoring that as a wetland, or is that too simplistic of an
No,
idea
that's not too simplistic. That's right. There's two parts of this new program. There's two parts of it. One is doing the assessment to identify where those opportunities exist, right?
Yep.
Where can we do this work? And there's a lot of ways of doing that. A lot of it's computer-based and et cetera. But looking at a watershed and understanding where is our water problems occurring and how can we then concentrate wetlands in these areas instead of way over here if we're trying to solve a problem, on that end. And then the second part, to a minor extent, is then, getting the work done to bring the wetlands that are identified back in a way so they can start holding water again. That being said, there's a lot of other funding sources out there for that type of work. When you get to the point where you have a plan to say, here's what we want to do, and here's why it's important for the flooding in Milwaukee or wherever, that stuff is really conducive to funding sources. Communities are able to tap into a lot of different ways to get that done. So right now, a big part of it is helping identify the most cost-effective places to do that work. And in the Milwaukee River District, I know you had Riverkeeper on a couple issues ago. That's happening, right? So there's work going on right now identifying those areas in the upper portions of the watershed that flow down into the Milwaukee River through the city, and identifying wetlands and how can we work with folks up there to start putting wetlands back to help grab some of this water so it isn't flushing downstream and causing all the problems. And, when you're working with farmers and you're asking them to put a wetland in to solve a problem in Milwaukee, sometimes that's a hard sell, right? So you gotta present it in ways that help them understand why it's also important to their operation.
Oh, and, a bunch of farmers, one of my buddies in particular, just is doing a wetland project of his own because it was messing up. He's in the hillier part of this. Well, I don't understand the full reason why it helped his particular property, but it's significantly helping his property, giving him duck hunting, also better for the deer and all that sort of stuff. So he could be happier with it. But yeah, I mean, it's a very, in my mind, wetlands are very like, there it is, and its immediate impact to you a lot of times is evident. Your house isn't getting flooded. Your land isn't getting flooded if you're a farmer as much. It's just more managed. So it always seems like a pretty direct impact, but I have a pretty shallow perspective of it.
Yeah, and
so to speak.
Yeah, the perspective for many years was, well, if we do wetlands conservation, that's at the sacrifice of other things. I'll sacrifice a piece of my land for a duck pond or something like that. So what we're trying to turn that around and say, you don't need to sacrifice. How can we put wetlands on the landscape to actually benefit, the issues that you're having? And, in farm country, there's so many good new tools coming out where we can actually literally go out on the landscape and you can look acre to acre and say, are you making money or losing money, on this piece of land? And there's a lot of pieces on farms, of course. We're traditional. We farm the same way, same acreages, year in, year out, decade in, decade out. Well, with new studies and new tools, we're able to help refine them. They actually call it precision agriculture even. And you can say, well, this place over here, you're only getting a crop off every 3 or 4 years. You're actually losing money trying to farm this thing. Maybe we can use this area to help you solve your water runoff issues, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's a wetland. That's an example of the type of thing where it's beneficial. Or if it's a grazing area. I was up at a place last week where they're incorporating wetland restoration into the rotational grazing systems. And it's great because not only are they doing all the things, like we were talking about, holding onto that water, reducing the gullying that these people are having, but they're also recharging the groundwater in the area, which guess what? Grows better grass.
Mm-hmm.
So their production, the grass production is better. They're able to get, and when you have a situation like that where you're bringing the water back in the right locations again, the wildlife habitat is great. These guys where I was visiting were also duck hunters, and he's got his kid out there hunting ducks in areas. And because it's grazed, the cows are going in and actually eating the invasive grasses that want to take over that wetland and actually producing better habitat conditions because he's doing it in an area where he's managing the grazing well. So all this stuff is compatible. And in the past, we've a lot of times thought that they weren't compatible.
Yeah, that's great. Is there a program where farmers, if they do convert part of their land to wetlands, is there a subsidy incentive, or would the government pay you to do that? I know they do that. The feds, I believe, do that on certain parts of your land if you put it to wildlife. Does that same program exist? There's a lot of farmers that listen to this program, and maybe they'd be interested. They probably already know of it if it exists, but just
there's a lot of different programs, right? And the one you're talking about is kind of an extreme set aside program. It's called the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. It's run through the Federal Natural Resources Conservation Service. And in that situation, you actually put an easement to the government on your land, and then they pay to restore the wetland there, and you manage it on. And with some people, that's a little too restrictive. They don't want that kind of restriction on their land. So there's a lot of other farm bill programs, and we're increasing the amount of state cost share funded programs for wetland work now as well. We have a big project, our organization working with DATCAP, State Department of Agriculture, helping increase the toolbox of what can be used from a wetland and what we call a hydrologic restoration standpoint. In other words, how can we fix the water on our landscapes using traditional cost share funding sources? Yep. And honestly, it was surprising when we first started this project, the very few practices that were actually approved through it. So we're increasing the number and the availability and the options that landowners have. So there's a lot of resources out there to help get working wetlands in working landscapes. And it's really fun because getting out and working with those folks, the rural folks in Wisconsin that have been working the land forever, just great people.
Absolutely. Well, we are running close on time. And so before we go, I just wanted to first ask, is there an important point that we haven't touched on that you think would be important to touch on? And then after that, I just want to see how people can get involved.
Yeah. Okay. So you've gotten the 101 scratch the surface nickel tour of wetlands today, which is great. So hopefully, if your audience is listening today and they're interested in this, the most important thing I can say is literally get out in the mud, get out there and introduce yourself to wetlands, physically be out in there and explore on your own or with some people, or there's a lot of tours and things people can go on. Of course, look on our website, look on all the materials. We have a thing we call a coffee break, which is a online presentation every other week where we get a different expert in or somebody talking about a wetland issue. You can find information on that on our website. And we have a big science conference that isn't just for scientists, but it's also for other folks as well. That are interested in wetlands. That'll be up in Green Bay this coming February. We move it around the state every year. So if you're interested in wetlands, get up there and you'll find a lot of other people. And get out in the mud, get out and explore. We are a membership organization. We exist because we have members helping support the work that we do. So look on our website. There's a ton of information out there about all aspects of wetlands, and get out and explore that. Contact us if you have questions. We get a lot of questions from landowners. I'm running around the state all the time, visiting people's properties just because I like to do it and talking to them with them about their wetlands. So that's the best thing that we can recommend right now. And don't be afraid of wetlands. Get out in the mud. Yeah, you might sink up to your chest, but you'll get out of it. Probably, right?
And I'll add to that: bring your binoculars because there's some cool birds hanging out in the wetlands. So,
yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And what website can people go to?
So WisconsinWetlands.org gets you to our website, and go out there and explore, and you'll see. We have a lot of blog posts and a lot of things about a lot of different wetland issues. We also have a big program, our Wetland Gems program, where we've identified 100 high-quality wetlands throughout the state. Use that guide and get out and find a high-quality wetland near your area and go immerse yourself in it and learn all you can and talk to your neighbors and work together about caring for these beautiful, wonderful, very highly valuable pieces of our landscape.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. That was a lot of fun. And, we got the 101. We'll have to have you on again, get the 202 or something like that,
Wetlands 2.0. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, there you have it.
Well, Charlie, really appreciate your interest in this and the work you're doing, promoting conservation around Wisconsin. It's really heartwarming to all of us. So keep up the good work, and we'll talk with you soon.
All right. Well, it's the least I can do, Tracy, and make sure you watch out for deer out there, okay?
Yeah, get my share. So.
All right. We'll see you soon.
See you later.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, that's it for now. Check out Wisconsin Wetlands. That's at Wisconsin Wetlands on Facebook, at WI Wetlands Assoc, ASSOC on Twitter, and
I didn't know what you were doing.
That's at WI Wetlands ASSOC, so you got that there.
Gotcha.
But check out their website, wisconsinwetlands.org. And Colleen, where can they follow the Cripescast?
Follow the Cripescast on all platforms at Cripescast, and make sure to follow Charlie and the Manitowoc Minute at Manitowoc Minute at Charlie Barons on all platforms. If you want to see Charlie on the road, go to cripescast.com and click on tour. And also check out our new updated merch website, manitowocminute.com. Our full video podcast is on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. And leave us a review only if it's nice, and let us know what you think of the episode.
Oh, yeah, folks. Thank you so much. Everybody keep her moving now. Watch for deer. And get out in the wetlands. See what they're all about.
Yep.
It'll be a fun time. Okay. Bye-bye now.
So roll out the barrel and get the band brewing. Life's got you down. Just keep her moving. It's on Wisconsin. The Badgers say it's the old Wisconsin Jubilee.
Sometimes when you're ice fishing, you put your foot in the walleye hole and go ass over tea kettle and you think you're done. No, you gotta keep her moving.